Labor Day is upon us again this year, and this always provides a good opportunity for us to look at Americans' attitudes about labor unions. Interestingly, this is one of the first questions that Dr. George Gallup, who founded our company, asked way back in 1936. And the first Gallup poll questions were asked in 1935 of any kind, so 1936 was really at the very infancy of the Gallup poll. And sure enough, Dr. Gallup was out there asking Americans, do you approve or disapprove of labor unions? And there's the results in front of you. 72% of Americans said they approved, and this was in the Depression, mind you. 20% said they disapproved. Now, the high point for approval of labor unions came in 1957. When 75% of Americans approved. Attitudes towards labor unions drifted down some, and then we found a fairly significant drop in 2009. A lot was going on relating to labor unions at that point. That was 48% who approved in our poll we conducted in August 2009, and that 48% is the lowest in Gallup poll history. Now, since then, it's edged back up a little. This year, as was the case for last year and the year before, 52% of Americans say they approve of labor unions. So that's a little higher than the all-time low, but the last several years have, generally speaking, if you look at the long-term trend, been the lowest approval for labor unions in our Gallup poll history. Now, we looked to see if we could find which Americans were more or less approving of labor unions. There's not a big difference by age. There's some difference by income, but perhaps this isn't shocking. The biggest difference comes by ideology and partisanship. Look at this whopping difference between conservatives and liberals. 33% of conservatives say they approve of labor unions. That goes all the way up to 71% among liberals. And very similar by party. 31% of Republicans say they approve of labor unions, and if you look at Democrats, that's jumped all the way up to 74%. So labor unions today represent a very political entity in the American political landscape, and it's no wonder that our data show that members of labor unions, which is now a small percent of Americans, but members of labor unions support generally the Democratic candidate in presidential elections. That's our Labor Day update for you on labor unions. I'm Dr. Frank Newport, Gallup Editor-in-Chief.